This is Phantology.
You may have heard of us.
What's up, Goths? Welcome back to another episode of Phantology Podcast. My name's Jake, and I'm here with my lifelong friend, Josh. Classic Jake and Josh mess around.
Oh yeah.
Got a
It's
couple
been a
of
while.
those.
It's
Yeah,
been a
it's been a
bit.
minute.
Yeah.
Been
Yeah.
a minute.
Too long.
As usual, I feel like usually when it's a Jake and Josh mess around, we're doing something spooky. Is that
I think
always
so.
thing? We've
Yeah.
done The Stand. Did we do Pet Cemetery together?
I think we did Pet Cemetery. Yep.
What else have we
A lot
done?
of
Just
Stephen King.
us.
A lot of Stephen
I-
King together.
Those are the
Wait,
only.
those are the only. Do we do any Stephen King adaptations? No, I think yeah, those are the only two.
I feel like we've done one more recent than Salem or than Pet Cemetery though. What would it have been?
Huh.
I don't know. But yeah. Well, as you can tell, we're about to continue the spooky streak. Josh and I had this idea to dedicate October to some, October themed stories. And I think it was your idea, Josh, to do vampires. So we decided to like really dive into the vampire genre. And we wanted to read, portrayals of vampires in fantasy across time, starting with Dracula. So today's episode, we will be reviewing Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula, a classic Gothic horror novel.
Yeah, I am super excited. It's already gotten me in the spooky season mood. We've read this and both I'm finishing up. I have like one more chapter of Salem's Lot, and then
Yeah.
I think next on the docket is the Will Smith movie one.
I
Shoot.
Am Legend.
I
Yeah,
Am
yeah.
Legend. Yep. Yeah.
Which we're reviewing that
Yeah.
one next though. So
Yeah. Well, what are we doing that one before Salem's Lot?
yeah, it came out in like the 50s.
Oh shoot. Yeah, I guess oh yeah.
Uh,
Shoot. I should have read. Okay. Yeah, either way.
we might not.
We'll see. We'll
That's
see.
fine.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but it's already so those are the two I've read so far, and it's already gotten me in the kind of spooky October mood, and I'm really digging the vibes. Um, and let me tell you that it has messed with my sense of timing a little bit because one thing I realized is that in the forward to Salem's Lot, and sorry, this isn't a review for Salem's Lot, but in the forward of Salem's Lot, Stephen King said that he read Bram Stoker's Dracula in like the 50s. And
Mhm.
so I realized that there's as much time between like the 1897, like when it was written, to when Stephen King read it, to like from when he wrote Salem's Lot until
To
now.
now. Yeah.
So like Salem's Lot is as much of a classic for us as like Dracula was when Stephen King read it. Or like not as much of a classic, but like the same amount of time had gone by.
And right in between there, I'm gonna get the actual release date of the book. 1954 is when I Am Legend came out. So right smack dab in
Yeah.
between that. So yeah, so kind of so you guys know we're gonna do Dracula, I Am Legend, by Richard Matheson, and then Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Some
Mhm.
classic vampire tales. And yeah, starting it off, and then we'd also like to dive into some just vampire adaptations across time. We'll probably watch the Dracula adaptation, and we've already seen I Am Legend, and say there's a Salem's Lot adaptation coming out this weekend that I'm excited to see as well. But for now, we'll be focusing on Dracula. So Dracula, I had never, well, this is you've read it this first time for this. I read it last year for the first time, I believe. Um, Maybe it was the year before that. I read it within recent time. And I will say I was very much pleasantly surprised. I was expecting some low, I don't know, some like cheap entertainment type story. Um, but I thought it was really well done.
It
Um,
holds up. Yeah. Like
yeah,
I can see why it's a classic. It's one of those that like you wonder like, oh, is it just a classic? Like, why is it a classic? Is it just a classic because it came up and it didn't come up with ideas of vampires. It kind of took a lot of the urban legend or folk legends and stuff and combined it into a narrative,
It like
and
codified
did
it
that really
though,
well.
like
Yeah, yeah,
um in a strong way. And but yeah,
but
super influential,
yeah, and
clearly.
but yeah, it had so much. It had like deep themes. It dealt with faith. It dealt with technology. It deals with like kind of the clash of like mysticism mixed with like the kind of starting to be
Reason,
industrialized
logic.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It has doctors gallivanting
Critiques
around
of
with
gender
priests.
roles. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Um, so and it did all this in like a way that's genuinely gives you some tension and some spookiness. And yeah, I mean it's a really entertaining, fun read that doesn't sacrifice on the depth and
Hmm.
the deeper meaning of life. So yeah.
I read Frankenstein in high school, which I think you did as well. We had the same
Hmm.
English teacher, different periods.
Yep.
Shout out Miss Fisher, wherever you're at. Loved Frankenstein, and if I'm remembering correctly, Bram Stoker was part of that gothic horror crew with Mary Shelley. Um, and Frankenstein to me is a like top tier book. I still like it more than Dracula, I'd say, but I think Dracula is right up there with it. And similarly, I think not to get too much into Frankenstein, but I think both of them feel like they would feel like older writing than they actually do. Like I think Dracula is much more fast-paced in its writing than you'd expect for something that came out in the 19th century. Um, and writing, I think like writing aside though, the really like what's the word? Not surprising again, but the spectacular part of the story is just the story framing. It's a epistolary, I think is what you call it, where like every part of the story it unfolds in either a letter or a diary entry or like a newspaper or something like that. And it makes for this really compelling storytelling where you're so like in these different characters' heads and you're seeing these like different things from their points of view that um made it really engaging. And it's one of those examples of things that uh you can't it's like something that's unique to the writing medium. Like you can't really portray it that way in a movie so much, you know? And so I don't know, it was really compelling. What did you find or what did you feel about the letter
About the
aspect
form,
of it?
yeah, I wasn't as like hot on it as you were, I don't think.
Mm,
I think that sometimes I did want a little bit more just straight narrative out of it.
mm.
But I think that I liked it at the beginning and then it kind of not wore on me, but like it just became less cool, less interesting to me.
I think its
Yeah.
strongest parts are when the mystery is at its height because I think it really leans into the mystery aspect. But yeah, I can see once you already know what's going on, you just want to like get into the action more. I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I have I have an old coworker who I think the first letter starts in like March or April in the book, and he has this reading guide where he reads Dracula every year, and he reads it like letter by letter, diary entry by diary entry, like according to the dates. So he's like reading it throughout the year, following along with it. It's kind of a cool
That's kind of
idea.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of neat.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
cool. Yeah, I mean, don't want to get into too many spoilers here. I will say Josh kind of went over some of the themes. I was surprised at the uh like um deep dive into gender roles. And it like is this Victorian time? I feel like it's a Victorian setting. Um, where there's some I can't tell if it's a progressive take of Victorian gender roles or if it's a more conservative, like kind of showing why you should follow the Victorian gender, like the established gender roles of the time. I think there's a way to interpret it either way. We can get more into that in the spoiler section. Um, Definitely lots of like more overt sexual themes than I thought there would be in a book
Hmm.
this old. I assumed the Dracula like
Like
more
being
yeah, more
asexual, like yeah.
I thought that was more like a something that changed with the adaptation over time, but it's clear and present in this
Yeah,
one.
that's
Yeah.
honestly part of like my original wanting to do the series was to see how the vampire takes have become over time. And I went in thinking that for sure the sexual aspect of vampires and like would have been a more modern take
Yeah.
on them. But yeah, definitely not. It's been definitely around since the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or since at least you know, this story. So
Yeah. And definitely more again kind of comparing to Frankenstein just because they're both classics, very impactful on like horror in general and came around at the same time. But I think Dracula leans more into the horror aspect than Frankenstein. Frankenstein is
mhm.
more of an exploration of humanity and like relationship between creator and creation and father, son, God, human, that kind of thing. And there are some like frightening moments in that, but I feel like Dracula is much more like we're in it for the horror, we're kind of in it for the gross out, we're in it for the shock value more than
Yeah.
Frankenstein. But
Yeah, one scene in particular, which I'm interested to see if you think the same scene is the most intense scene of the book as I do, but we can't really get into it until we do
yeah,
spoilers. But yeah, there's one scene I'm thinking of in particular that was like, yeah, that was pretty shocking, you know?
yeah. Um, yeah, kind of wrap up my side of the non-spoiler review. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a solid 8 out of 10. I think it's a solid read. I think everyone should read it at least once. If you love vampires, I think you're gonna love this book. Again, I'm just surprised at how much it doesn't feel like it's as old as it is. Like it feels much more like a contemporary of uh like Lord of the Rings or Narnia or something like that in terms of the writing style. Like it doesn't feel more archaic than that. And like the story elements and the themes are pretty similar in terms of again, not the same themes, but in terms of like how digestible they are. But
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, for my end, the non-spoiler side is I will say it was different than how I thought it was going to go.
yeah,
So, I don't want to give too much away, but like it's one of those books where like the first 20% doesn't really represent the last 80%, you know what I mean? In some
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
Um,
and I feel like in modern interpretations, the first 20% is focused on the
Setting
most.
up the yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Um, in a lot of ways, yeah. Like I had an idea of how the first 20% went. Um, because I think the Netflix adaptation a few years ago, do you remember it was like a 4-part miniseries?
I
Did you
didn't
ever watch
watch
that
it.
one?
No, I didn't know about that one.
It was really cool. So and I think I would like it even more now. So what they did is they had one well, okay, mild spoilers now, and this will lead into full spoilers. So I guess if you've never read that adaptation and want to go in blind, then you can dip out now. And then if you're okay with
Hmm.
like if you've seen the Netflix one. Anyway, so with the Netflix one, I think it was 4 parts. The first part was the story of John, oh, wait, what's his name?
Jonathan Harker.
Jonathan Harker. Um, was his story in the actual castle. And then the next episode, and these are like hour 20-minute episodes, so they're kind of like movies.
Okay.
And then or one after that is takes place on the boat. I'm
Mm.
forgetting and so it kind of like
The
fleshes out that whole
Demeter.
story, the Demeter. And so
Yeah.
that's a really cool, like it just focuses on the boat. And then the third, maybe it's just three. And then the third part, and they're different ages. So, and then the third part is like a modern time where there's like a detective that's trying to find, and I think it like that's what like pulls in Van Helsing and stuff. And it's like, but it's like takes place in the modern day. So it's kind of like different interpretations on like each different parts of the book. It's pretty neat. It's a cool adaptation. Some episodes were
Interesting.
definitely better than others, but yeah.
I'll definitely watch it for our episode where we review like adaptations in general. I will say I've heard that there has never really been a pretty faithful adaptation of Dracula, um,
Yeah.
which is fascinating to me. And kind of an interesting tidbit before we get into spoilers. Dracula itself was pretty like mediocre in terms of popularity and success at the time. And
Really?
it really wasn't, from what I was seeing, it wasn't like well known until the movie Nosferatu was made. And then there was a lawsuit because Nosferatu was basically the story of Dracula, but they didn't have the copyright to use Dracula's name, so they used Nosferatu instead. But it was just like a copy. So there was a lawsuit over that. And then that's kind of what got Dracula back in people's minds, from what I understand. So it's funny that it's like kind
Classic.
of like,
Takes a lawsuit to rocket
yeah,
something into mainstream. Yeah.
yeah. But cool. Yeah, so overall, I said like an 8 out of 10. I assume
Uh,
you're kind of similar there.
yeah, similar. It's hard to assign like a straight number. If you're talking about just
Yeah,
straight enjoyment, yeah, probably
yeah,
somewhere between like a 7 or 8 out of 10. But in terms of
yeah,
uh like a must read just because of how influential it is and how it started
yeah,
up basically a whole genre, like a 10 out of 10. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The impact is clearly evident, which is why we're doing this.
yeah.
Um, all right, hopping into spoilers. So turn away if you care. This book has also been out for over 100 years. So um, I will say yeah, talking about that first 20%, I thought when we like the book starts with him on his way to Dracula's castle, I thought the whole book was going to be in Dracula's castle.
Right.
I was so surprised when he was like out all of a sudden,
And now I'm back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um that I think that and the like the letter format are what like surprised me the most. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I really liked the kind of like mental games that Dracula would play with him, especially with the letters of like, I know I'm basically like sending evidence that is going to be
Hmm.
used so that he can kill me. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm sending these letters, I'm writing these letters so that he can get away with murder, basically. Like
Yeah.
I really like and how that kind of messed so much with him mentally and just kind of the descent from like thinking, oh, everything's fine into like, no, everything's not fine to I'm a prisoner to like I'm a prisoner that's like death sentence, like worse than death sentenced.
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah. I always like when I was reading this, interesting, like reading this so far removed time wise and like cultural like milestones wise, that like him looking in the mirror when he's shaving and realizing he can't see Dracula's reflection, the stuff with like Lucy's behavior as she starts to turn, and like there's like a little bit of a mystery of what's happening, and like Van Helsing comes and has to like help them piece it together. I wonder how much of this was just like so obvious to the readers at the time, like, oh, vampire, or how much of it was like him kind of laying the groundwork to like have an actual mystery reveal, like how much of that, because like clearly reading it nowadays, we know exactly, like even if you didn't know what the title of the book was or hadn't, or like if they changed the name of Dracula, you would know, oh, this is a vampire, that we're reading
Right.
about. Like from the very beginning, you would. But so I wonder how that, to me, that didn't take away from the enjoyment, but I wonder how much that mystery remains. Um, yeah, that scene with the three brides in the castle too. That was one where I was like, oh man,
It's
this seems a
steamy.
little
Yeah.
scandalous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
He's writing to his fiance.
I know. Yeah, that was definitely, yeah, again something that I thought that would just be a more modern take on it, but nope, it was
Yeah.
definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
totally, yeah.
So I mean, uh talking about the sexuality, I couldn't like it's hard to, I feel like that ties into the gender roles as well. It's hard to know what was your interpretation. Do you think Bram Stoker was trying to share that like more of like a women's liberation and like sexual liberation in that way? Um but the sexuality part of like those brides and like the whole seduction thing with Dracula. And then also with gender roles, there's the fact that her friend Lucy is dating three different guys and she ends up choosing to be with the one who she loves rather than the one that's like the best paper match, in terms of
Hmm.
like money and like stability. Um, I don't know. I feel like I feel like the authors were kind of writing to be progressive that way to an extent, progressive for the time. But then story-wise, Lucy dies, she gets turned into a
Yeah.
vampire, and then her lovers have to all kill her. And she's like dating three people at once. And then Mina survives, but she was the one who stuck to
Chased.
these
Yeah.
more traditional gender roles at the time. And like, yeah. So I don't know. What do you think? I kind of with the first time reading it, I was like, this feels way more progressive than I thought. And then thinking back, I'm like, now this feels like one of those 80s horror movies where like
Yeah, somebody goes and hooks up in a car and then gets
and then
slashed.
they die
Yeah. And
because
then they die
yeah, because they
because
were unchaste. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think that I I would need a ton more like cultural, awareness to be able to say for sure. But it does feel like Lucy was punished and Mina was spared because of like what you said, because Lucy
Well,
was like
yeah.
open, she was open. It seemed like she was opening herself up to like passion and lust, and that's why Dracula was able to like get a hold on her
Mm,
and like turn her,
yeah.
and so I think that's my kind of general interpretation, and maybe not saying that those things are wrong, but saying that like that was why he was able to do it.
Yeah, I guess a more meta take, which I think a lot of like the 80s horror movies were doing this to be meta, is that him writing her him writing Lucy's punishment for not adhering to these standards of the time was more of a critique of the standards of the time. Like, this is what you guys want. You want like this sort of punishment, and I'm critiquing it. I don't know if he was playing that kind of meta-analysis there, but yeah, so somehow it felt progressive, surprisingly progressive for the time, in my opinion, while still at the end of the day, like there's a line, I can't remember the exact line, but it was like a true woman needs to be doing this or something like that, regards
Hmm.
to like how Mina was. But um an interesting like so many good scenes, like where the fact that Lucy's um they're not lovers, I don't know what you call them.
Suitors.
Attendants, suitors, that's the word. Lucy's suitors had to all like kill her together after doing like the blood transfusions. Like
Yeah.
yeah. Like
That
like
that
you
was
said.
that was what I thought the most shocking scene of the book was Lucy's death
Death.
and
Yeah.
how kind of visceral that was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't yeah. Like I wonder if that like a lot of that was why it didn't do as well at the time.
Maybe.
Um um Also, I loved your take with the like the intersection between like science and superstition, where like you said that you have the priest and then Ben and the doctor, and then they're like Van Helsing's trying like these blood transfusions and all these things. It's kind of like almost not, I wouldn't say a critique of science, but like, and this might be just to be add to the horror element that you can't like science your way out of it, but it's like reason only gets you so far. Like you tried all these medical procedures, and then at the end of the day, you know, you have to, in order to fight the devil, you have to get some help from God. Which I think was done really well too.
Hmm.
Like leading you to that point of like desperation, like what can you do? And it's like all you have left is this the superstition of the like the garlic and that kind of stuff. But
Yeah, I thought that was
yeah.
expertly done. And the best vampire adaptations, like in we can talk more about this in Salem's Lot because
Hmm.
it does the same thing really, really well. But
Yeah.
of where there should be you're how do you handle it when you don't have a rational explanation?
Yeah.
And like especially when you're a doctor, when you feel like you should be able to figure out and you can't, and
Hmm.
how you're able to adapt to that. And yeah, and I think it does a really good job of portraying that inner struggle and of like saying like what are the moral implications of what we do, like going back to that scene where the suitors have to kill her, like they don't know, right? Like they don't know for sure. They know that she's like not alive in the traditional sense, but like how do you know for sure if she's like
Yeah.
beyond reviving or beyond like hope? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
so at that point, it's like you have to just have some sort of faith that like no, that's not a human anymore, but science can't really tell you that. So I don't know, it's really weird, and it's really thought-provoking, and the book does a really good job of making you wrestle with those thoughts, I think.
Yeah, and trying to view it more as a product of its time, like the Victorian era, um, like you're starting to see some pretty good advances in science. And was germ theory, I feel like how new was germ theory at the time? Ooh, this is saying germ theory time, 1850 and 1920. So in its like kind of infancy, barely starting out right now. And they do kind of hit on it a little bit, right? They kind of call it a pathogen of the blood,
Mhm.
or something like that. But interesting time to be like exploring like so many advances in science, but also you're in this like more seem like to me it seems like that's more of a superstitious time frame, so it's almost this there's these growing pains and it's like the teenage years of reason, I feel like, in the Western world. And so you have this like mix of like still some of these like older beliefs, like of like what is causing these things, and it makes for this really good intersection of like superstition and science, like you were saying. Um yeah. Other themes I saw were the like just the like fear of the unknown, the other, and
Mhm.
obviously like with a book this old there's going to be some some bigotry throughout, and yeah, and I don't know how
Yeah.
much of that I don't know how much of that informed the book itself or how much the book informed modern takes. That's always kind of a chicken and the egg, but
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting was Dracula made a comment about how he wanted to be able to fit in so well, like in English society, that he didn't even
mhm.
want to like have an accent, like he wanted
Yeah.
to be able to seem like a native speaker
Yeah.
and like a native to England. And, just dealing with like modern, politics and like immigration, both like in the US and abroad, like how, how much, and I don't want to get too political here or anything, but like how,
Mm.
and just like the, just the dynamics around immigration and how much people should be expected to, adopt the culture that they immigrate to.
Yeah.
And obviously it was his thinking that like I don't want there to be any I don't want people to be able to tell at all that I'm not an Englishman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how important that was to him. So anyway, it's just again, it was just another interesting thing of like, is that how all immigration was that was that like the paragon? Is that the right word? Like the how
Yeah.
everybody thought you should if you were to leave
uh
your country and go to another one? Is that what people would have expected in the at the turn of the 19th century? Anyway, just
I feel
interesting.
like, yeah, I feel like the book writes it as in like, and that's part of kind of his facade, and like maybe like the xenophobia there is like, yeah, they'll say they're gonna like integrate, but really it's this bloodthirsty vampire. It's crazy to me to think about just like xenophobia and like just othering in general across time, and how it like those boundaries of in and out groups just change and kind of morph. Like those who are in an out group are now part of the in group and vice versa. And it's just all like, I don't know. It's a good example of how made up it is, especially when
Hmm.
you're reading it in fantasy. So again, one of those things like, is this a critique of that? I don't know. Kind of feels like
Yeah,
maybe it's exacerbating those types of fears. So
right.
um, I don't know. Um, uh, yeah, I don't anything else when it comes to the themes of the book. I mean, again, there's the like the sexuality and it's done in such a like tempting way that I think good horror does that um I can't tell if it's meant to be like I feel like maybe Bram Stoker was like a little um like trying to hold back his desires almost when writing this,
Maybe.
like yeah, in an interesting way. I did read something that some people think that he may have been gay, so this might have been like his like kind of reaction to uh like being with a woman in general. Like I don't know, but interesting. It feels
Was
very like
was his like his homosexuality being like the thing that he was trying to keep in like was that what
the
the
analysis I
Dracula the
saw.
vampire was?
Um, I didn't see that, but maybe I saw the analysis more like um kind of like want like the ju or the confrontation between wanting to like marry a woman and like have that status of being a married person and like fit that lifestyle that is like standard for the time, but also so like wanting it for those reasons, but also not like being afraid of it and being like put off from it and how those are like in juxtaposition to each other and like anyways, more that's more of what I saw regarding it. But yeah, maybe I mean it feels like he writes like um just this carnal desire super well and like a way of like how like you how it can just overtake and how you should like resist it. Yeah. I think it's done really well.
Yeah. I think yeah, I think that there's a lot of obviously like analogies and symbolism of vampires
Yeah.
in general. Um,
Yeah.
the last interesting theme that I wish was explored a little bit more, or maybe I just kind of missed the exploration of it, was like the whole Renfield situation, like the insane
Yeah. Yeah. He
or
was
the prisoner that
fun.
was thought to be insane. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
fun's one more one
yeah.
more
Well,
for another kind of creepy, kind of like one of those things where you don't quite know what to do with him, you know?
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I really liked it. I thought they integrated Dracula in England really well. Like he is affecting Lucy, and then there's this guy who's like trying to be his servant. And I don't know. I think it added a lot to the him showing his power as soon as he gets there. Um,
yeah, maybe that's
yeah.
another kind of indication that like the whole Lucy plot wasn't all that progressive because like the other person, like she fell kind of under Dracula's spell, and then the other person was Renfield, like who was,
Yeah.
more what we would typically consider insane,
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that had a pretty good cast of characters, and they all felt pretty unique, especially given that two of them almost had the same name. Like there's Jonathan Harker, and then the doctor is it Dr. Seward? His first name's John. Um, but yeah, I thought. And did you listen to the audiobook, right?
Yeah,
I love the was it Quincy, the American? I
yeah.
loved hearing his accent every once in a while. I feel like it's interesting to see Americans written by non-Americans,
I'm
as an
just like a
American.
cat. Yeah, just like a typical like the Yankee. You know what I mean? Like I never
Yeah,
really understood like the whole Yankee thing, growing
yeah,
up when I was like little. I'm like, oh, and then now I'm like, oh, so it really is just a term of like, yeah, just like a, cowboy, like
yeah.
doesn't have much culture, not much, just kind of unrefined out there on the frontier.
Probably how we view Australians today as Americans.
That's true. Just like the crocodile hunter
Yeah,
or
Crocodile Dundee. Yeah.
crocodile Dundee. Man,
Um,
rip to the crocodile hunter. As a side note, sorry, we were watching some movie like Back to the Outback or something. It's just like an animated movie on Netflix. I was trying to explain to my son, um, like the impact that the
Steve
Crocodile Hunter
Irwin.
had on me. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
like every night, like every week I would watch it with my dad, and like it made me love
yeah.
animals so much. And he was like, anyway, just sorry.
So many people in like second grade who had to like do a report on a famous person. It would always be like at least two people would do Steve Irwin, you know?
Dude, he was
Yeah.
goat, man. All right, back to back to Dracula.
Yeah, back to Dracula. Yeah. I thought Jonathan Harker, he's like more the main character. I thought he was fine. I liked Mina more than him. I thought she
Yeah,
was like I felt like she had more impact on the plot than he did, even though she starts to become like passive to the plot once Dracula starts um trying to turn her. But I thought her and probably or she and Van Helsing were probably my favorites. It was interesting seeing an old Van Helsing. I'd only ever seen the Hugh Jackman Van
Hugh
Helsing, so
Jackman,
that's what I was expecting.
dude, that one was an awesome movie. I, I remember going to see that in theaters, and man, my like 10-year-old self, that was the coolest movie in the world. I'd be
Yeah,
interested to watch it again.
yeah, I have no like I do not need to see that movie again. I wouldn't be like opposed to it, but yeah, it was a good
I know it's
time.
probably a terrible movie, but as a
Yeah.
10-year-old, what more do you want than like somebody going and like wrecking vampires and werewolves
Yeah.
and stuff? Like it was cool.
So yeah, interesting to see. I think that's an interesting point of a difference of like the adaptations throughout time. I didn't know Van Helsing came from Dracula, first of all, and I didn't realize that he was like he plays more like the wise wizard role in this than like the vampire slayer, you know?
Yeah. And sorry, I was 12 when Van Helsing came out.
Oh, you're good.
Uh, so I wanted to fact check me myself because I remember thinking that Kate Beckinsale is pretty hot. And so I was like, at 10, I don't know if I would have thought that. So I'm like, it must have been a little bit later. So I wanted to fact check myself. Anyway,
Like
all right.
it's funny.
Mackenzie, don't listen to that.
Um yeah. Who did you have any standout characters for you?
Yeah,
How did you think the characters did in general?
I think it was maybe on the weaker side of the book, but again, like the characters have withstood the test of time. So it's hard to say that they're weak because they're not, but like I don't know if they're like super super compelling in the like in and of themselves, you know?
They're all more passive players, I'd say, even though
Hmm.
like and it's more of an ensemble book, I'd say. These aren't characters that you are going to be I don't know. They're just not really a focus of the book. I will say the characters are probably one of the weaker parts.
Yeah.
They all serve more to drive the story forward. And I think they'll do a good job at that. But it's not like reading, try not to compare everything to Frankenstein in this review, but like um, Frankenstein's monster is such a like well fleshed out character in that book.
Hmm.
But I mean, the books are just completely different. That one's more
The
in the
character
heads.
study.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, yeah,
Yeah. I think that I really did like Van Helsing's character. I think if there's anyone that I was like really driven by, it was probably Van Helsing because he was really one where a lot of those intersections of faith um
hmm
versus the reality of the situation and needing to adapt to it and needing to make the hard decisions. A lot of it came down to Van Helsing being willing to kind of go there. So
yeah, yeah. I think overall, like I said, I give it an 8 out of 10. I think ways I would have liked it more is if it didn't keep the suspense the whole time. Like there are times where like things got spooky and I would have liked it to like maintain its spookiness the whole time, but it kind of slowed down a little bit. Um like it's not a there are spooky scenes for sure, but it's not a book where the whole time you're like I don't know, especially after reading some
yeah,
Stephen King recently,
yeah,
it's not the same
where it's just
not the
like
same
it builds and
degree.
builds and builds and builds and builds
Yeah.
until you're like, yeah, yeah,
This is more like more mysterious
yeah.
and like off-putting, which yeah, that was I think that would if they were to adapt it into, or I guess they have, but um, I think that is one way that a movie could really elevate the story is just maintaining that eerie and like suspenseful feeling the whole way through. But,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah.
All right.
Um, yeah, I don't know. Any final thoughts for you or uh yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think we touched on pretty much everything. I'm really excited. One thing that really stood out to me was how I of course knew that this book was influential. And but
Hmm.
in my kind of thinking about the series, this little series we're doing, I was like, I assumed that it would be so much different now, that there would have been so much
Yeah.
change in the way that vampires have been presented in media, that it would be a different kind of story that we're telling of like, oh, here's how it started off as being this like kind of just straight evil force, which it is, but like it also has all these other elements to it of passion and desire and sexuality and like, versus just like straight evil. And
Yeah.
so I was really surprised and impressed to find so many of those themes in the book. I think was my
Hmm.
biggest takeaway. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's the most thought-provoking book ever, but it is way more thought-provoking than I thought it would have been and way more interesting to like chew on. I thought it was going to be this like just pulpy tale that's just for some excitement, that's it, but there's a lot more substance to it than that. And I think it deserves like you said, it deserves to be read by anyone who's just for the literary value. I remember after reading it, I was like, I want to find a really old copy of it just used. And because I think like that's definitely something I'd want to have on my bookshelf. Haven't found it yet, but
That would be really
um,
cool.
it is. I forgot to mention this, but I've been playing a D&D campaign for the last couple years with my cousins, and it's the Curse of Strahd campaign, which is basically we'll have to talk about this during the adaptations. It's basically like Strahd is basically Dracula, and you're like summoned into his realm. And there's a lot of similarities, and like they're lifting a lot from Dracula. They're also lifting a lot from Dracula adaptations that are different from the Dracula book, which are interesting. But it was just it feels very fitting. Like we just played last night, and we just made it to Strahd's coffin. And in this book, they put a bunch of holy wafers in the in his boxes of dirt, right? To like make it so that he can't use that soil
Oh,
to like to stay on the land. And so I'm playing a cleric, and so I'm about to pour some holy water all over that coffin and destroy
you
it.
get
So
that holy water. You pull
yeah,
that Van Helsing out of you.
yeah,
You should
oh
be like,
yeah,
and I changed my name to Van Helsing and or
dude. Not to get too much into it, but my character turned evil in last
oh,
session. He
really,
turned back
man.
good. Yeah,
Oh,
I was offered the power to overcome death, to resurrect other people, and I was so tempted by it that I accepted. And in accepting this power from a dark source, it turned me evil. But I used it last night to resurrect um, a key person, and then as I used it, I became good again. And D&D is
oh,
great. Yeah, everyone should play
that's
D&D. Yeah, or some sort of cooperative storytelling game. So fun. Well,
nice.
yeah. That's our take on Dracula. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you will read it if you haven't. And if you have, let us know your favorite parts. What takes did we have wrong? What did we have right? Um,
Oh,
check the links
Jake,
below. What's
I feel
up?
like a classic Jake Josh mess around is to say if this gets over X amount of views, we're going to do something.
Oh, is that something I don't remember? Yeah. Okay.
So here's the deal. If this gets over, I don't know,
I
over
think we gotta say
200,
50. Let's be
200,
honest. We
no,
gotta
no,
say
it's got to be
50.
hard because I'm gonna say
Okay.
if it gets over 200 views on YouTube, which is like maybe 10% of our videos do. But like if it gets over
Yeah.
200 views, then we will have a vote on Discord on an extra vampire adaptation or book that we have to review or read.
Okay.
All
I'm
right.
totally down with that.
All
Yeah.
right, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay.
And
All
so
right.
it could be
Yeah.
bad. Like so they could force us to watch like a bad one, like this is the worst one, or it could be like, oh, this one's underrated, whatever. We'll see how it goes.
I'm
All right.
stoked to get to that point where we talk about
Yeah.
adaptations. There's some good ones out there. All right, yeah. Speaking of Discord, check our links below. Join our Discord. You can support us on Patreon, all of that. And thanks again for listening and watching. See
All
ya.
right. Thanks, guys.